It's a privilege to have been here and to get to know most of you. And it's a very sad day for me. It's been a most central part of my life and a real privilege that I could be part of Compassionate Friends. So, let's go. Grieving is such an individual process that each and every one of us will have a different experience and journey as we mourn the loss of our loved ones. This is due in part because we've all had different life experience. It also depends on our view of life and how we make sense of life, on our age, the traditions in our culture, our past experience of loss, and the relationship with the deceased in the past or the present. The time it takes for the grieving, the healing, and the learning to live again alongside the pain is different for each one of us. There isn't a specific time frame for the healing to take place. The time it takes to heal is the time it takes. So this in part is my journey of why I'm here. I came to Compassionate Friends 25 years ago because I had lost my brother in a car accident. An oncoming bakkie carrying concrete slabs had a burst tire and had a head-on collision with my brother's car. He had taken his family to Belito for a week and they were on their way home on a warm, slightly misty evening, heading towards Warden when the accident occurred. His wife was in the front seat, nursing their 9-week-old son, and their other sons, aged 3 years and 5.5, were in the back seat. He swerved to avoid the oncoming bakkie, but teed with it next to a cutting on the side of the road. And, as they say, the load shifted into the car, killing them all outright. For me, I hope it was outright, because the thought of them suffering was too much for me to contemplate and caused many anguish hours and copious tears. We were a very close family, and I considered his sons as dear and as important as if they were my own, and a good substitute for the children I'd never had. I received the call about the accident and their death at 11 that night from my brother's father-in-law, who had the unenviable task of identifying them in the morgue in Warden. I still don't take late-night calls as the impact was devastating. You know what this feels like. That call, that news. I then contacted my parents in Zimbabwe to tell them. My initial reaction was shock, as the horror was too large for me to comprehend. I was 4 years older than Trevor, and he was the most important person in my life. Siblings have a special relationship, as no one knows us as well as they do. We share the same home traditions, and we can be the best support for each other. We know the atmosphere that molded us. Some of my first thoughts were, why couldn't it have been me instead? And what could I have done for the accident not to have happened? This guilt is part of grief. It isn't a rational reaction because emotions are not rational, but they are there just the same. Now I know that these thoughts and the horror are normal reactions, as our brains protect us from information it cannot deal with. Then I was just in confusion that lasted a long time. Which one of them was I to think of, to mourn? I thought, how could this possibly happen? All reason and logic disappeared, and I functioned on automatic. I didn't sleep the rest of the night or much after that as I waited for my parents to arrive. The funeral was sorted out, and we started clearing out their house. I broke when I came to throw out Stephen and Ross's little toothbrushes. Some sense of the enormity hit me when my sister-in-law, Karen's brother, and I organised pallbearers at the funeral. The baby was buried with his mother, so there were 4 coffins that had to be carried out the church. That meant 16 pallbearers. If I go into memories like these, I'm right back there in February 1995, 26 years ago. No matter how long you have lost your child, grandchild, or sibling, the love you shared binds you forever. I believe that as long as I love them, they are still loving me. That bond will last as long as I live. I now see the pain as being equal to the love, and as I can't stop loving them, I have accepted that the pain is mine too. I continued to operate in denial for 2 years, working and acting normal to the outside world. But every evening when I was by myself, the tears flowed. I was more worried about my parents grieving, as I didn't feel I had as big a right as they did for the depth of my loss, yet it was there. I took to reading an enormous amount of books. Though I had been brought up a Catholic, I had left the church many years earlier, so I now found no solace at the church. So I read Tibetan, Muslim, Jewish, Christian books, anything to do with loss. And I struggled with deep depression. But come sunup, I shelved it all and went about my life. I work in the film industry as part of the crew on dramas, and it requires total concentration, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was a good escape, provided I could cope with the triggers that occurred. And they occur for all of us as we interact with life. Reminders, or a thoughtless word, can inflame our wounds like salt on an open sore, and we struggle on. I organised a memorial stone to be erected at the site of the accident. I asked our film medic to translate the autopsies from the Afrikaans, but nothing made it real. I could not make sense of the reality of 5 people ceasing to exist. My life was shattered, empty. The tears never stopped. When my folks visited me 10 months after the accident, I had heard of compassionate friends, and I came here. I saw a lovely counsellor who spoke to my mother and I. My father wouldn't come with us. I told her I was so upended that if I saw the waves going in reverse or someone walking on the ceiling, I wouldn't be surprised, as the whole world had ceased to make sense. When I said I couldn't make sense of never seeing them again, she said, "No, you never will." I was shocked at the baldness of her remark, but it stayed with me. It was the dawning of reality. About 2 years after the accident, I received news of the death of an uncle, and on the same weekend, news of a close friend who was diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, something clicked in my brain about the reality of death, and I started crying from a broken heart, and I couldn't stop. I still had 4 days left of the shoot I was on, and somehow I got through them. Then I phoned around for a psychologist and went to see her. I took time off from working, and I visited her 3 times a week for 4 months. What I faced was indescribable pain of the loss and other cans of worms that were opened. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and the tears never stopped. I clearly remember that I would rather cut my arm off with a rusty knife than go through that pain. And still, it went on. And I've seen it in front of you when I've spoken to you, and I know that pain. I used to attend every monthly meeting of the compassionate friends that I could, and I found a tremendous feeling of support and understanding from them. These meetings with different speakers were often hard because there were always tears as people shared their different experience of loss. I knew what they were talking about. There was anger, there was denial, guilt, pain, and isolation. Eventually, I did reach a point where I could begin to look at the reality of it, and I did begin to heal. I resumed that therapy off and on, between jobs, for 3 years, and slowly made a new sense of how the world worked. The waves don't flow backwards. I can't walk on the ceiling. I learned to express my enormous anger in acceptable ways. The journey was one at re-looking at how the world does work from my perspective, from my culture, from my circumstances. There were setbacks, because that's what life is. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. My mother died 6 years after the accident, and at her funeral, I had a chat with a friendly priest I'd known all my life. He actually used to teach us in school. I returned to look at religion from a whole new perspective, and I examined all I could, and I made new sense of the spirituality of it. I'm not much one for dogma, but I'm prepared to seek for the sense underneath all that, and it served me. One of my hardest decisions in the first 2 years of my mourning was deciding where those 5 beings had gone. All my reading had not given me the answer, but 2 things brought a concept into focus. Firstly, in Jung's life story, he said, if one person doesn't believe in an afterlife and another does, and the one who does finds a better quality of life through that belief, there's a reason for believing in it. It's not much to go on. But then, my sister-in-law's friend, and both of them were teachers, told me that in the law of physics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. As I believe we are energy beings, based on the way our nerves send messages, I found that comforting. It made sense to me. So with some contemplation on these 2 ideas, I decided to believe in an afterlife. I have no proof, but once the mind has accepted a concept, it finds proof in all sorts of areas. It didn't perturb me that I couldn't prove it. Because I know that either I believed in life after death or I would lose my sanity. It was a choice, and I made it. While I worked in the film industry, I also got degrees up to honors in psychology. The film industry is a perfect place to observe people and deal with many different personalities. As the years went by, I resolved that one day I would like to give back to compassionate friends and use my psychology, not only to understand grief, but to try and alleviate someone else's pain. I attended several courses here. I learned that the grief of siblings is as valid as the grief of parents and grandparents. We have our own special relationship to mourn. The loss is no less. In 2012, I counselled my first sibling. I feel privileged to have become part of this organization, and as with any service one extends to others, I have grown and truly come to terms with the initial confusion, the trauma, the hopelessness of my life. I discovered the only purpose, excuse me, I discovered the only purpose in life is the one we make and put into it. Even 26 years later, I have my bad days, and I discovered areas of my grief that I haven't fully looked at. I keep going. I would rather not have this wisdom life has given me. I really want my family back. But I have accepted this isn't going to happen. So I thank them for starting me on my journey and keeping me there. I so look forward to seeing them again. And if that doesn't happen, I will savor the anticipation. What I've had to learn is how to live alongside the pain, to find a new meaning and purpose in life. I have spent 26 years doing that. I will continue to strive to make each day count. I owe a great debt to compassionate friends, and I would like to thank them for the opportunity to extend myself, to explore my grief, and to take solace in their wonderful support and continual caring. Each person have been privileged to counsel gives me a chance to deepen my wisdom by sharing their story and their pain. Nothing in life is a one-way street. We cannot give without getting. I am indebted to each person I have spoken to. I salute you all for coming here today and taking the risk of tears, of hurt, of being out of your comfort zone, of opening your grief. You have made it possible for us all to advance our healing and yours. One-on-one counseling is just part of the compassionate friends. Another essential part is sharing the same hurting space with others, reducing the isolation and letting the healing begin. We support each other in our collective grief. Thank you, Debbie, for holding it all together here. You and your team, Arthur and his committee, make this possible. I owe you all so much for giving me a place to grow, even while I carry my pain. I look forward to being associated with you all for many years to come. Thank you all for hearing and sharing my story.